Skirk is an amazing main DPS when in her niche and when in her luxury teams, but she falls off considerably when these conditions are not met. This is especially concerning since her ability to be used depends on enemy lineups in all endgame modes, and ally lineups in Imaginarium Theater, which Hoyoverse directly dictates. Dahlia is a shield support with attack speed buffs that is currently underperforming compared to almost every other defensive support in the game. Azurelight is only an upgrade on and worth pulling for Skirk. This is your too long didn't watch. If you've received all the information you wanted and wish to head on out now, then I appreciate you stopping by. But if you want more information on these new characters and a new weapon, then let's continue on, starting with Skirk. Skirk is a cryo DPS that massively buffs herself in cryo hydro only teams. Despite this restriction, she does have two different playstyles that can be utilized, a normal attack or burst DPS playstyle. We'll start with the former first because it has consistently higher DPS. Skirk enters this playstyle by tapping her elemental skill, which grants her a cryo infusion and increased scalings on her normal and charged attacks. Her elemental burst, while in this main DPS stance, which I will be referring to as her alternate burst, grants additional damage to her normal attacks based on the amount of rifts she absorbs. We will get to what these rifts are in a second. Her burst DPS playstyle is only achievable by using her hold skill, which will absorb the rifts around her and then allow her to cast her primary elemental burst. This burst deals a massive amount of damage and will deal even more damage based on how many rifts she absorbs. Her passives are all large buffs that incentivize her to be played in hydro and cryo only teams. Her first ascension passive allows her to spawn a rift once per 2.5 seconds when a nearby ally triggers any cryo related reaction other than melt, with a max of 3 rifts active at once. She can absorb these rifts by using a charge attack or her alternate burst while in her main DPS state, or when she uses her hold skill. Her Ascension 4 passive grants her a stack for 20 seconds when a hydro or cryo ally other than herself deals hydro or cryo damage, and only 1 stack can be granted per party member. These stacks increase the original damage dealt by her primary elemental burst and her normal attacks in her main DPS state. This amount is pretty minuscule unless it is when she has 3 total stacks, where she increases her normal attack's original damage by 70% and her elemental burst's original damage by 60%. Finally, we have her final Ascension passive, which increases the elemental skill talent level of all of her party members by 1 if there are only hydro and cryo party members in the party. There is technically more to her kit than just this, but it is mostly complexity for the sake of complexity, so I will not be mentioning it. As the main DPS, Skirk's damage potential is rather large, mainly due to her 4th Ascension passive, which dramatically boosts her total damage output by around 60%. However, most of her damage is primarily single target focused, and she has no good free-to-play teammates, making her damage vary drastically from a 1.4 at the lowest to a 7.2 for a main DPS. Thankfully, her team-wide talent level buff would increase the team's elemental skill damage dealt by around 7%, which is a game changer for certain off-field units. These two boosts can be incredibly powerful, however, they can only be achieved when she is in a team of only hydro and cryo characters, which is why she is so absurdly limiting. If used in any situation without just these elements, her team-wide elemental skill level buff and her Ascension 4's massive Bennett level damage buff are removed or heavily diminished. For instance, let's just say we want to use an Anemo unit instead of a full cryo and hydro team. We'll use a low-cost team like Jingshou, Kaya, and Layla, which does not perform well at all, and then we will swap out Layla for a significantly better defensive option, Xianyun. Even in this setup where Xianyun is offering 28% more attack plus 40% resistance shred to Skirk, the comp with Layla performs better since she doesn't take away Skirk's immense self-damage buffs. These buffs do so much for her that they are able to surpass multiple other buffs from a significantly stronger defensive support. So if you do plan to use Skirk, you have to use her in freeze teams. In these teams, she is an incredibly powerful main DPS option as she can deal an immense amount of damage in both AoE and a single target. However, in this spot, she directly competes with the previous best freeze team queen, Ayaka, who has recently become an incredibly powerful main DPS once again after the release of Escoffier. If we compare these two and their teams, Skirk in general beats Ayaka in terms of team DPS by about 10%. If we look closer, Skirk tends to deal nearly 20% more damage than Ayaka on average in single target content. However, Skirk has very small AoE attacks, which means Ayaka tends to beat her by 2% or more depending on the amount of enemies she's facing. This is an incredibly powerful position to be in for Skirk, since she is rivaling the previous Freeze Queen Ayaka, who has always shielded well, but dealt less damage overall in practice, meaning Skirk will almost always be an upgrade. While Skirk might be numerically impressive, she is incredibly restrictive in terms of team composition, and she is only better than older units against a single target. While it would be fine to make her the guaranteed best in her niche and just increase her numbers, that would not fix most of her real issues. Skirk unlocks her functionality in Hydro and Cryo only teams, which causes multiple problems for her. Because there are very few good 4-star Cryo options, Skirk has to rely on her premium teams for damage more than other units need to, since these teams deal about twice the damage of the free-to-play alternatives. Skirk's teams are primarily Cryo, which causes issues when against Geo, Dendro, and Cryo, plus some Hydro Elemental shields, as her teams will never be able to deal with them. Like other composition restrictive units before her, Skirk's requirement makes her a terrible character in Imaginarium Theater, since she requires 2 of the 3 current active elements to be Hydro and Cryo. Because of these issues, I suggest they make 2 minor changes to start, though I would like to see more potentially in the future. Both of these changes involve rewording her passives, and that's it. Her elemental skill talent level passive does not need to be as restrictive as it is. The buff itself is not even that powerful, and most elemental skill damage dealers do not work with her main archetype, so the Cryo and Hydro only restriction could and should be removed. But if they don't want to for whatever reason, then at least make it active at all times, but only for Hydro and Cryo party members. The other change is to her Ascension 4 massive original damage buff. We're removing the Hydro and Cryo character requirement, so it only requires Hydro and Cryo damage. This would make Anemo units good alternative supports for Skirk in order to shorten that gap between her free-to-play teams and premium alternatives. It also allows her teams to have a better time at dealing with other elemental shields. Both of these buffs will also make Anemo units good enough substitutes for her best supports, to the point that she could be used in Imaginarium Theater more reliably. At this point, she would end up being a single target and more consistent version of Ayaka, which I feel like is a good spot to land in. Otherwise, she can end up like how Nilo is right now. With Skirk done, it's time to talk about the newest 4-star sword user being added into the game. Dahlia is an attack speed buffing shield support unit. His skill summons a deployable that will deal damage to enemies when they touch it, or it will launch allies up into the air when they touch it, and then after either is done, it will destroy itself. His elemental burst deals AoE damage and grants all allies a shield and Favonian favor for 12 seconds. While Favonian favor is active, every 4 instances of normal attack damage dealt by his own current active party member grants a stack of medicine, up to a max of 5 stacks. When his shield is destroyed, or when its duration runs out, a stack of medicine will be consumed to summon another shield. His passives allow an ally under Favonian favor to gain 2 stacks of medicine once per 8 seconds when they freeze an enemy, and the other grants the active party member an attack speed buff based on Dahlia's max HP, capping at 15% when at 37,500 HP. His constellations grant him 2 energy when medicine is gained, increases the shield strength of the current active party member only when medicine is consumed, increases the duration of Favonian favor to 15 seconds, and increases the attack speed buff he can grant by 10%, while also allowing him to revive a character once per 15 minutes. Currently, Dahlia's kit grants a refreshing shield and a 15% attack buff before C6 or 25% at C6. That's it. What makes this worse is that a unit like Mika offers essentially the same attack speed buff at C0 while also enabling Furina and having a niche of his own, making him just better overall. Dahlia's shield is also not even that powerful, especially for the amount of HP it requires to be decent. Let's compare it to other shield supports. We'll use Zhongli, the premier shield support, Lanyan, a support with another Hydro shield, and Toma, another normal attack focused support, as a means of comparison. Looking at their shield health, Dahlia is severely lacking. When considering his shield is getting constantly refreshed, his shield cap is less than every other shield present. This is ridiculously bad considering he has to invest significantly more into his scaling stat than any other unit here. On top of that, his buff is also the weakest present. His buff is only useful on normal attack focused DPS, but gets heavily diminished when a character uses anything other than ranged normal attacks, though he does also get the 20% attack buff from Noblesse. He could also offer the Hydro Resonance bonus, but currently there's no Hydro normal attacker that scales with HP. To compare, Toma has a 15% normal charge and plunging attack damage buff, plus potentially 20% attack buff from Noblesse and also Pyro Resonance. Zhongli has a team-wide 20% resistance shred buff plus 20% attack buff from Tenacity, and then also the disgustingness that is Geo Resonance. And Lanyan has the 40% resistance shred buff from Viridescent plus the 48% attack buff to one ally from Thrilling Tales. These other units offer significantly better and more versatile buffing potential than the likes of Dahlia, while also offering larger shields. This puts him in one of the worst spots that a defensive support can be in. He is sustaining the team worse than other defensive supports, while also offering a buff that barely any character can use. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt and see how well he impacts these ranged normal attack DPS units, starting with Wanderer alongside his best support, Veruza. For comparison, I will be using Mika, who offers the same attack speed buff while enabling Fiorina, and Bennett, who offers a significantly more beneficial buff while also enabling Fiorina. When looking only at Wanderer and Feruzan's damage dealt, Dahlia plus Bennett end up buffing these two to a similar degree that Mika and Fiorina do. However, the key difference between these two comps is that any other character's DPS, aka Fiorina, is not considered. So while Dahlia and Mika might seem like equals with Wanderer, Mika ends up being a much more powerful option because he allows them to make use of Fiorina's buff and high damage dealing capabilities. That's not even mentioning multiple other factors. There's like Bennett, who's just leagues above the other two. This isn't considering AoE damage, where Feruzan ends up becoming more impactful to the team's damage, which therefore means Fiorina's buff is more impactful to the team's damage, and then that's not also including Marais-José, which would end up buffing Wanderer even more. Okay, enough about Wanderer. What about another normal attack DPS like Yoimiya? Well, the situation is the same. Bennett is still leagues above the other two, but if we just want to focus on Mika and Dahlia, Mika's team-wide healing enables Fiorina, who proves to be a massive upgrade over Yelan. If we consider Fiorina's ability to let Yoimiya utilize a Marais-José artifact set, then the gap widens even further between Mika and Dahlia. This is just how impactful healing is nowadays, which is just another reason as to why Dahlia needs considerable buffs. Dahlia desperately needs changes. He's incredibly underwhelming right now because he has effectively nothing useful that his teams can utilize. He's got a shield that refreshes itself, and he has a 25% attack speed buff at C6. It's incredibly underwhelming, especially since a character like Mika exists who offers nearly the same attack speed buff at C0 and a more synergistic type of defensive utility. On top of that, he has a niche as a physical DPS support. Dahlia is lacking in multiple categories, even when compared to other underwhelming 4-star defensive support units like Mika and Toma. He simply just needs more, and he needs a niche. His only uses currently are with normal attack DPS that don't have hit lag like Wanderer and Yoimiya, those that would benefit from his element like Skirk, or those that want his shield like Arlecchino. However, there's still Mika or Bennett who offer better supportive utility while granting access to Fiorina as a support. Dahlia has none of that, and as such, he's leagues behind most other defensive support units, putting him on par with or even behind the likes of Dory. Dahlia is missing so much that it feels like he is unfinished. It's like there's a whole nother 50% of his kit that has yet to be unearthed. He deserves major buffs for his shield and offensive utility. We are in the days where defensive supports can now buff the entire team while also outputting a grotesque amount of damage and having insane synergy with multiple other characters. Dahlia is missing all of that. Give him one of them at least and we'll call it good. Now let's end off the video with the new weapon. Azurelight is the newest 5-star sword being added into the game. It offers the average base attack and crit rate substat that comes with the 5-star weapon. Then for 12 seconds after an elemental skill is used, the user's attack stat increases by 24%. During this 12-second duration, while the equipper has 0 energy, they will gain an extra 24% attack and 40% crit damage. This is a phenomenal attack and crit stat stick that can be used by a lot of characters. However, the secondary effect of the passive can only ever be used reliably by Skirk. So while it may obviously be Skirk's best in slot weapon, what about everyone else? How does it fare against another powerhouse of a sword like Primordial Jade Cutter, which offers a lot more crit rate and a similar attack buff as scales with HP? This flat attack buff works best for those characters that have lower base attack stats, but the attack percent from Azurelight would benefit more from those that have a higher base attack. So let's start off with the ball in Azurelight's court and give it to the top 3 sword characters with the highest base attack: Laurent, Ayaka, and Skirk. But for Skirk, we are not considering the additional passive effect. Taking a look at the numbers, and we see that Azurelight never stood a chance. Primordial Jade Cutter beats out Azurelight in almost all situations except one, when alongside Ayaka against multiple targets. This is because Blizzard's Trigger offers so much crit rate against frozen targets that Primordial Jade Cutter ends up easily overcoming overcapping. This slight bit of overcapped crit rate ends up putting Azurelight above Jade Cutter since it comes with no wasted stats, but in every other situations where you do have a balance of stats, Primordial Jade Cutter is the better option. Even then, there are other options that are more in line with Jade Cutter, like Mist Splitter, which is good for attack scaling DPS that use their elemental burst often, or Haran, which is a significant upgrade for those that deal normal attack damage. So the only character I could recommend you pull this weapon for is Skirk, as every other character has a significant upgrade in either their signature option or one of the strong, versatile 5-star swords. These new goodies we are getting offered are, in my opinion, very lackluster. Skirk is a stronger and more consistent version of Ayaka, but with the downsides that her teams have an easier time being walled off by content, she has to be used with only Cryo and Hydro characters, and she faces heavy damage losses if not used in her premium teams. Dahlia has lackluster buffs and defensive utility that doesn't synergize with any character. Instead, he's just a worse version of almost every other defensive support in the game. And Azurelight is a good stat stick, but if used on anyone other than Skirk, it tends to fall behind the strong, versatile swords we have had for a long time now. The weapon, I guess, is fine since the new ones are now only for the characters you like the most, or they're just okay otherwise, but these characters have some clear and major issues. Dahlia is borderline unfinished, and Skirk and her teams can be rendered unplayable at a whim. A lockoff might not seem bad because, oh, Hoyoverse would never do that. Meanwhile, Nilo has been sparingly playable in Abyss for about a year now, and is playable in Imaginarium Theater only when the stars align. It definitely can happen. It's a shame that a supposed powerhouse of a character can suffer the same fate. But that's all I have to say about the new additions coming to Genshin. What do you think of the new toys we get to play with? Do you plan to pull for Skirk? Do you think Dahlia has more uses than I suggested? Do you have any ideas on how Hoyo could make these goodies better? Tell me what you think down below. But with that, I will get out of your hair. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.